All right, thank you all so much for allowing the Black Caucus to present in front of you all today. But before we start, we wanted to cleanse the space with our sage. This is all symbolic since we cannot actually burn it. We don't want to evacuate the building. So you all have a sage stick that you can do with your own practices at home. And then I wanted to also start with libations to acknowledge our Black Caucus members that could not be here, as well as the Black Caucus members that were not fortunate to stay in the cohort full of fellowship. I'm just going to do a little drop since we are on carpet and we're not outside. And then you're supposed to drink afterwards. And then I'm going to turn it over to the next facilitator.
Hi everyone. So we are going to be talking about what is Black identity. We're going to start off with the difference between the social and cultural factors that on Blackness. And we're going to define the social factors through storytelling, define those cultural factors, and then also you'll hear through stories. We'll speak on freedom and what our individual visions for freedom will look like.
Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, cool. So we're starting with defining what social factors are. Within our journey as a caucus and deciding how to shape this presentation, we kept going back to understanding how we understand and embody Blackness, and then through that we realized that there's both social and cultural factors that manifest and make up that identity. So when we're talking about social factors, what we mean by that are things that have roots and stems within our society. They are influenced by, or they can influence individuals in society at large. And they are typically rooted in many different institutions within our social relationships. So that can include education, the political, the economic, which is featured in here. But we can essentially understand social factors as ways that society is organized. So as it relates to Blackness, many social factors try to condemn Blackness within scopes such as like the slaver, the other, etc. So it's very important to understand that within social factors, they create structural changes in society, which then inform how we see and relate to other people. And I'll pass it to Jacinda.
So in this slide, we will talk about the intersectional nature of structural oppression. I could have put so many different things on this, but I patterned this after a law professor out of the University of Chicago. Her name is Tricia Rose. All of these hyperlinks and resources will be shared at the end of class, so all of you all will have this. And she talks about wealth and jobs, how Black people have been systematically erased from the opportunity to achieve wealth, as well as not being able to get jobs, because each time we had jobs in the society, we were always replaced by either policy or a new wave of immigrants. Housing, we all know about redlining, and then when we're able to actually obtain housing, all of the policies that actually stripped away housing from us, as well as just the current housing crisis of 2008, with single-handedly made Detroit the #1 largest African-American home ownership, to now we are more renters than we are homeowners, and this all has happened within 10 years. This is all policy. Policing and criminal justice, we all understand that. We understand about private prisons versus state prisons, and how private prisons are actual businesses, and how policies are made to make sure that those private prisons are filled, and they create the policies on the backs of Black and brown communities. And then how this is enforced and reinforced through mass media, whether it's magazines, whether it's the news, whether it's professors. I didn't even put religion in here, but how all of these things are consistently perpetrated on all of us to participate in this. You know, even Black people have to fight against anti-Blackness because we're culturally conditioned to also hate ourselves. And the last one is the criminal justice system. Again, how all of these are intersecting, so that when you're looking at one thing in the Black community and you think it's failing you, it's supposed to be that way. All of these are connected. I did not even put in education. So each social factor that Black people go to try to get help, it is strategically meant to fail you so that it will keep you in a state of fight or flight, and that's not what we're supposed to be. Can somebody put my hands over this? Sorry.
Cool. So thank you, Jacinda. So we're going to dig deeper, right, into these concepts. As Jacinda just outlined, social factors have an institutional nature to it. So it shows up in many of the systems and organizations within our world that we then ascribe to. So with this slide, we kind of wanted to dig deeper into a social factor, which we can understand as racism. So racism, or even race in itself, we understand as a social construct. And the social construct is something that is very powerful and influences, once again, how we see each other. So I want to acknowledge Benita for giving us this language, but as we kind of can see within social factors, there are many layers to this process. So when you think about racism, for example, we have the interpersonal. So this can manifest as misinformation, bias and stereotypes, relationships between other people. So this can also be exposed as like when folks have microaggressions against them. That's kind of how we can understand the interpersonal. Institutional, essentially just as Jacinda just described with the last slide, there are many institutions of power that facilitate racism in a very particular way to then create unequal and unequitable outcomes. The institutional kind of also relates directly back to the structural, but we can understand the structural as kind of like a compounding force. So it's something that manifests within institutional spaces that then is naturalized into our ways of being, even though that's not the true case. And then finally, we have internalized, which is a very sticky one, because we can be aware of these systems that kind of set us against us versus them. But as we exist and survive in those spaces, we can essentially embody those same connotations. So what does it mean to be a Black individual, but then, you know, advocate for police safety? You know, there's tension in that, right? But this type of racism just kind of exposes how we are also exposed and can internalize these natures, even if they are inaccurate. And I will pass it to Taylor to kind of get us into the storytelling as it relates to these different types.
All right, thank you. So I don't know if folks know this, but I'm in medicine, and my interests lie in internal medicine and also to move on to do hematology oncology, which specifically focuses on both cancer patients as well as sickle cell patients is what my main interest is. And so I've spent a lot of time with folks in the recent months who have chronic illnesses, but specifically I have been drawn to how, I think we all know this, but how society treats Black patients, and specifically how society treats Black pain. And we spoke briefly about the 4 pillars, and I want to talk more, although they're all interrelated, on the internalization of pain. And I think we see this in all inequity around patient care, but I also think there's a specific unique set of circumstances that Black folks, Black women, Black men, Black queer folks express when it comes to pain that they're feeling, whether it's physical or emotional or mental. I want to start off kind of out of order with one of my patients that I had last week, who's still in the hospital. And she's a sickle cell patient. We'll call her Miss N. And she's 32 years old, has a kid, and comes to the emergency department at Harvard. And she had 4 days of not being able to feel the entire left side of her body. She noticed it about 4 days prior to coming when she was holding up her phone and it kind of fell on her face. She has sickle cell, and it's a very common presentation for sickle cell. It got to the point where she could no longer walk, and so she couldn't take care of her kid, so she came into the emergency room. This is tough to hear because it took 4 days, right? So there was 4 days of sort of enduring, because as a sickle cell patient, you're in and out of the hospital, and most of the time when you're in the hospital, it's for weeks at a time, because there's not much we can do other than to alleviate your pain, and then give you a blood transfusion if you need it. And I thought that this story, we connected and we were similar in age, and it was just tough to hear because she was a wonderful, wonderful patient, constantly in 8 out of 10, 10 out of 10 pain. It took 4 days for her to even come in, right? It took to the point where she could no longer care for her child. And this is something that I've seen countless times, especially when we talk about chronic pain. It's things that I have endured, I've seen family members endure, of, you know, I don't want to come into the hospital because I know it's not a safe place for me, but also I don't want to bother anybody because I constantly have this pain. It's sort of like a gaslight that we do to ourselves, right? It's not that bad, right? I can still walk around. Oh, I can't walk around. I can still get, you know, tell my child to get this place or get to that place. And so when she was hospitalized, to kind of bring it all to see how it is all sort of connected with the structural part of this. You know, when you're hospitalized with sickle cell pain, you press a button to receive pain medication, but that button only works 1 out of 6 times, unknown to the patient, right? She didn't press it at all for the first 24 hours while she was in the hospital. Then after that, you know, 24 hours, she was pressing it every 90 seconds, right? And to the point where she pressed it over 1,000 times. But again, you're only receiving that 1/6 of the time. That is something, I mean, it's hard for me not to internalize it, right? It's hard for me not to think about, you know, this could be me, this could be a family member. Sickle cell really primarily affects Black patients. And I just wanted to talk about like the legacy of slavery that is directly related to that, right? There's this element of having to protect and not show folks more in pain because historically we would have lost community, we would have lost our livelihood. And I also want to bring light to the fact that because of that history, we are systematically left out of the language of discomfort, right? We're taught to endure, we're taught to keep going and to not be a burden, and that also the healthcare system doesn't take our pain seriously. And so I think ultimately remembering that we have autonomy, and I think spaces like this, and feel free to talk about this with me after, I love doing this, you know, understanding and really bringing voice to that language of discomfort and being able to advocate for yourself as well as, you know, hold our healthcare workers accountable. So I'll pass it on to the next person. Oh, cheers.
That was beautiful. So I'm going to share an example local here in Detroit, talk a little bit about Black Bottom and how policy has impacted the Black community here in Detroit. So hopefully this can, so, you can't hear.
Detroit is a hustling city. Anybody that leave Detroit can go anywhere in the country and become leaders because they have that hustle instinct. And I think they just come naturally from the area that we came up.
The major lines to look at when you talk about the differences between the two communities, Gratiot Avenue, everything south of Gratiot was Black Bottom.
Black Bottom was the area where we stayed at.
The name Black Bottom comes not from a section where Black people lived, but for the rich topsoil. In the 1800s, it was largely a farming community, and north of Gratiot was the community known as Paradise Valley.
Paradise Valley was a place where you had Jackie Gleason, Newton World, Cap Calloway, anybody came in town. That's where they stayed at and they partied. And it was like Bourbon Street, which you have in New Orleans. That's what we had in Detroit back then.
Being born and raised up on 8th Street, I used to go down there to dance to old club called the Symbolic. When I was a teenager, we were into dancing.
Paradise Valley was essentially the business and cultural center of the black community in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s.
The nightlife was great. You would dress up.
Back then, people believed in dressing. Guys get dressed up, go to the shower, they clean up, parties, all up and down the street, like you said, even to the record shop. They would be playing music and people would open up late.
You had all the stars. There were stars of somebody came to Detroit. Okay? And we had the top musicians here back then. My house, every other house was a joint. So it was after hour joint. So music was going on 24/7. Johnny B.
So I thought it was interesting to show this video just so you get a sense of like Black Bottom in Paradise Valley was a thriving black community. It was a place where when folks migrated from the South, they knew they had some place that they can go, where they'd be welcome, where they can thrive, where they can live. You can find employment, etc. It was a great place. It was a fun place. But I wanted to also talk a little bit about the history, right? So a lot of us have heard about the 1943 race riot. This all started in 1942 when the city wanted to build the population. The black population was increasing so fast, the community was overcrowded. So they said they wanted to put a black housing development in a community, Conant Gardens, that was predominantly white. The white community was furious. They were upset. Things were happening at work where, you know, they were starting to see black people receive promotions and things like that. So there was a strike. After that, there was violence that took place in the city between the black and white community, and then rumors began to circulate where we heard a rumor of a white woman that was raped by a black woman. Then there was another rumor. I don't know if it was true, I will say that, but there was another rumor that a black baby was tossed over the Belle Isle Bridge by a white person. So this led to the 1943 race riot. After the race riot, which ultimately, in the end, it led to the displacement of more than 40,000 residents in Black Bottom and Paradise Valley and 10,000 buildings. After that race riot, though, the mayor at the time convened a group to really try to figure out what happened, what started this race riot. And as a result, they determined that the black people started the race riot. It was the black people's fault that this race riot occurred. So that really kick-started a lot of the destruction of that community, where in 1949, we had the Housing Act, a 1949 Housing Act that was enacted called the Slum Clearance and Urban Redevelopment Bill. The main parts of this were to clear communities that were considered slums, and then also replace those housing units with low-cost, affordable housing units. In 1950, Mayor Cobo is elected. He's very racist. He decides to accept the money to demolish the community, to get rid of these slums, but he does not accept the money to replace these residential units with low income or affordable housing. So what he does is he begins a lot of the destruction of the community, brings in private developers to begin to build the area up, and then in 1956 we have the Federal Aid Housing Act, which allows for highway development. So Mayor Cobo uses those funds to clear out the rest of the Black Bottom and Paradise Valley community, and then begins construction in 1959. So as I mentioned a moment ago, this led to displacement of more than 40,000 black Detroiters. Lots of folks lost their jobs. Businesses were not able to thrive because there was no population to serve their businesses anymore, and ultimately lost businesses. And so in the end, if we fast forward today, through these efforts to remove black residents and destroy black business, we're seeing, and this is really just one example in the city. There's so many other forms of systemic racism, but we wanted to give you one example. We see persistent economic inequities here in Detroit and across the country for black people. So some of the things I wanted to point out, I'm a researcher, so the racial wealth disparity in Detroit is stark. The median household income for white Detroiters is $16,000 more than that of a black Detroiter, and about $12,000 more than that for a Latino Detroiter. And that's just here in Detroit. If we take this to the region in comparison, it's even greater. The share of black middle class households is incredibly lower than that of the region. For Detroit to have the same share of middle class households as the region, we would need to see an increase of more than 34,000 households to be considered middle class. Black and Latino workers are employed in growth occupations at much lower rates than white and Asian workers here in the region. And then there are also severe disparities in access to small business capital for black business owners. Lending rates are about 75% here in Detroit than what it is in the region and the state. And aside from that, these impacts have also produced tons of generational wealth loss. Opportunity to even generate wealth was lost, and being able to pass that down, and the list goes on and on. So I did that in 5 minutes, and I'm going to pass it on to, to the next person. There you go.
Okay, so I am going to tell you guys a story about a woman named Elizabeth Beatrice Hartford. Now, she is not a real person, but she is a conglomerate of many black women who work in today's institutions of higher learning. So, in one Midwestern university, there are 2,300 women who occupy full-time positions. Of those, 37% are black. Of those black women, 73.77 are in positions of secretarial or domestic and service work. This is in 2023. Elizabeth Beatrice Hartwell is one of those women. She started working at the institution right out of high school during a time when the norm was to work your way up the career ladder. She started in an entry-level office support position and has been employed at the institution for 25 years. During that time, she has had 2 promotions and minimal pay raises. She is still a secretary despite having made it quite clear that she would like to expand her role. A few years ago, she was promoted to a managerial position, having all the office support in the department report to her. She received a 3% pay raise. It was months later that she realized her position was a name only. At the university, it remained coded as secretarial staff. But she needed the money, and she hoped that the supervisory experience would help her advance and show her leadership skills. As she walks the halls, people stop her to chat. "Hi, Miss Elizabeth," or "How are you, Miss Liz?" Some hug her, others gently put their hand on her shoulders as they greet her. She hates being called Miss Elizabeth or Miss Liz. She has made this quite clear and prefers Miss Hartford or Elizabeth. But the practice has spread, and now even senior management in the department refer to her as Miss Liz. What may irritate her the most is the reference to her despite her physical presence. "Miss Liz will get that for you," or "Look for an email from Miss Liz," as she's standing right there. Her email signature uses her full name, middle initial included. "Miss Liz, you look nice today." "Miss Liz, your hair really looks good. I wish I had your sense of style." Miss Liz, Miss Liz, Miss Liz. In small haphazard groups, she is praised and mentally gorged of her wealth of institutional knowledge, but is rarely acknowledged for her contributions at larger formal meetings. When she is invited, it's usually to take notes. When she has asked for more responsibility, she was given the task of planning a lunch for all the secretaries in the department because she has such great hosting skills, and people just love to see her smiling face. No one knows that Elizabeth has a son who recently graduated from a prestigious university with no debt because she and her husband were determined to give him a financially healthy start to his life. Or that every chance she gets, she and her sister travel with the goal to visit every European country before they turn 60. They don't know that she is 6 credits away from receiving her BA, which she paid for out of pocket while her son was in school, 2 classes at a time. They don't know that she has a rich history of Detroit in her blood from the time her great-grandfather left the South and joined the millions of Black folks that sought work during the migration. They have no idea that her great-grandmother, who was white, was born into a wealthy Detroit family and disowned because of her love for her great-grandfather. They don't know. They just see Miss Liz, who must have deep Southern roots, who seems to always smile, and who they think loves her job. They don't know Elizabeth Beatrice Hartford, but she knows each of them.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. So we just left the space of recognizing how structural conditions truly does penetrate the Black identity and the Black spirit. And these make very material outcomes within our everyday lives. But now we want to talk about culture, because culture is truly the space that Black folks have been able to create in between their freedoms and unfreedoms. So when we talk about cultural factors, we acknowledge that they have roots and stems from both individuals and groups, and it's a passed down practice across generations. These cultural practices highly influence individuals in society, and they mainly occur through the internalization of culture and lineage across space and time. So those structural factors deemed to condemn us to an outside space within the peripheries, culture and the memory of our culture reinserts us back into center. So the most significant thing I can pull out is culture is truly a vessel to transform social relations, and this is something that Black folks have always known ever since we came to the U.S. So I have this quick video. Is the volume high enough for y'all? It's good? Okay. So this video will kind of encapsulate more of like, what is Black culture?
What is Black culture? Well, today it seems to be a ubiquitous force, a special spice sprinkled in every stew pot in the world. It's a flavor, an energy mimicked, adopted, adapted, adored, and adornment people think they can just hang around their necks like costume jewelry. Don't they know Black culture is precious metal? It's heavy and gorgeous. Don't we know Black culture is more than an outfit and an accent and a slick tongue? It's more than a creative way to do and say everything. It's more than fresh, more than wailing the blues and jazz and soul and 2 turntables and a mic, a beatbox, a breakbeat, a beat machine, a stage show. It's more than a good joke and a belly laugh loud enough to remember that Black culture is more than pain. More than a patchwork of bodies in the bowels of a boat. It's more than blood in the blue water. Black culture is transatlantic. Black culture is more than the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe, and it doesn't begin where freedom ends. Black culture begins where life does, in Africa.
So I wanted to share that video because I thought it was also interesting how her depicts Black culture as more than the different options and examples she showed, but it also are those things. So it's this ever-encompassing ritual and practice that Black folks have used to survive what we've experienced. And I just wanted to quickly end on what Robin Kelly says about Black culture, that Black folks are not merely inheritors of this practice, but we are also its makers. So as we move through time and as Black folks continue to navigate the structural systems, we are inventors in what keeps us whole and reminds us that we are beyond the white imaginary. So I will pass it to Jamie to provide another example of Black culture at work.
Thank you, Trinity. So I will be speaking a little bit of the evolution of Black identity terms. When I speak about these terms, I am talking about specifically Black people in the continental United States who are descendants of slaves. The transition of Black identifiers being defined externally, the social conditions and factors, to being defined internally by the Black community. So when I say this, I'm speaking to the terms used to define Black people here transition from being defined by the white supremacist culture. When the original terms were created, we were viewed as property, not as people. They were also used derogatorily, and we were not defining them ourselves. So it starts off, with the N-word, N-I-G-G-E-R-S. It moves after that Reconstruction and Jim Crow period, it moved to colored. Then after that, Negroes around the 50s and 60s. A little bit after color, kind of used interchangeably during that time. Then it went to Afro-Americans, African-Americans, and Black came a little bit later. And there are also some more colloquial terms that are used within the Black community, and then there are terms that differ depending on what region you are in the United States as well. We wanted to talk a little bit about how Black identity terms can be viewed as positive and negative depending upon the individual you are speaking to. Some people might view more terms more offensively than others. Some people might identify or feel associated with one term and not others. We see that conversation a lot more recently with African American, Black, whether or not people identify with one of those terms. Also, we want to speak about the co-opting of language by Black folks and how it has made more positive and powerful meaning towards Black identity, again, from some people's perspectives. Black identity, again, can mean different things depending on the individual you speak to. However, there are kind of some broad general terms now that we know maybe we shouldn't be using if you are not a part of the community. And again, people who are not a part of the community, depending on who you are speaking to, certain terms may be offensive. So again, just kind of making sure you guys understand the moving from the transition of terms being defined by other people versus us trying to collectively define something ourselves as something that has positive associations for our community. Which leads us into us trying to say, what is our vision of Black freedom?
This is just a question that we ask ourselves. What would our lives look like if they were uninterrupted? This is so heavy and it's so loaded that I sat on this question for about a week because it's overwhelming. It's very emotional for me. As you all looked at the presentations and you saw like all the things and all the weights and all the struggles and adversities that we had to come through, I don't know what our lives would look like if they were uninterrupted. Because I mean, based under a capitalistic society, even if it was flipped, we're not of that spirit to want somebody to feel the same pain as we felt throughout our time here in the Americas. And so that is my answer.
So for me, what would our lives look like if they were uninterrupted? Black freedom to me means an undoing of the oppressive systems, systemic systems that kind of go against our community. It would be radical love and empathy, not only in our community, but towards our community from other groups. And it would be, again, just that empathy and understanding for ourselves and each other.
For me, it would mean being able to be unapologetically myself without being under the constant white gaze would also mean being able to enjoy my culture without the violence of cultural appropriation at every single turn, including like Sprite commercials that use black joy.
I apologize. Everyone can please take your gloves and put them on right now. This is the point where I'm going to pass out these gears. I actually tried to degrease them 2 times, and the gunk and the grease would not come out off of them. And it's kind of symbolic. You know, it's very symbolic of no matter how hard we try, it's just something always there. And I wanted each one of you all to hold this gear because this is the weight that we as Black people have to carry all the time as we try to move forward with experiencing what our lives will look like uninterrupted, what freedom looks like for us while we support ourselves, our families, and our community.
So as you are holding those gears, what Black freedom looks like to me is that weight right there, that we can be able to find healing, and that we can be able to have conversations. For me personally, I always look in first before I look outward, and for Black freedom, for us to recognize that we have the power. We're more, while all of these amazing and influential things have happened, but we come from lines of kings and queens. We come from lines of royalty. We come from a rich heritage. And even though that has been taken from us, or that we don't forget that we're more than just the narratives that people tell us, and that we believe it ourselves first and are empowered to do that.
I think we'll end it there. We're over time.
Thank you all. Take your
Before we go, we just have one more thing to share.
Yes.
Which are the resources that they have.
Yes, so these are some of the additional resources. This overviews our social conditions. There's some really great material in here. One that I really wanted to highlight is the Color of Law, and it's the second book out, correct? Awesome. This action part 2. We also have these additional resources under social and cultural. In addition to these, some really great films, TV series, and documentaries. And again, all of these books, this will be shared with everybody. So feel free to check out these podcasts and all of these wonderful material. I think it'll really, tie everything together and make this come home. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Can we get a picture, y'all?